Okay. Good morning. I'm Larry Cohen. For 10 years, I was the president of Communication Workers of America. My term ended in June. I know Bernie Sanders for 25 years. I couldn't be prouder of that relationship. I couldn't be prouder than to be a volunteer for Bernie Sanders. While I was president of CWA for 10 years, a major issue that I worked on was trade. I worked with Ambassadors Kirk and Froman as part of the Obama campaign and as a supporter of the president. We expected a real change on trade. Sadly, we didn't get it. But we went through the process. We went through the process to try to work on successive trade agreements. Colombia, and I've been to Colombia many times, and still gripped by the people who came forward telling of the death threats they had received, and seeing the names of hundreds of Colombia trade unionists who had been murdered, and hoping that we would have a change in how we view trade. Or Korea, where we were told that we might get finally a trade agreement to put workers' rights, human rights, American jobs in the forefront, only to see again an agreement that didn't do that. There was Panama, where we were neutral, and there was a go of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, where we were positive. But in general, the trade regime that we are living in today, that has devastated this state, that has devastated the North Philadelphia community where I grew up, has not changed since NAFTA. And that's what this is really about today. For 30 years, I worked across the border in Mexico with progressives working for changes in labor rights and human rights in Mexico. There's been no change. The fear that grips people, whether they're trade unionists or environmentalists in Mexico, has not abated. I was promised directly by this president that we would see workers' rights, a labor action plan for Mexico, by the Secretary of Labor. This Secretary of Labor, the last one, and the one who initially was Secretary when the president was sworn in. There's no labor action plan for Mexico. We're going to hear a story in a few minutes about the transfer of jobs to Mexico and what it did to a family here in Michigan. Yesterday I stood in the cold in front of the Nabisco plant in Chicago with workers from that plant. Workers from that plant. A local president from the bakery workers who's worked there for 48 years. He met his wife there. But more importantly, younger workers who stood up and testified in a media event about what the impending shutdown of 2/3 of production, including Oreo cookies, that will now be made in Mexico and brought to the United States, what that would do to their family, and what would that would do to that community in Chicago. Last week, on the phone, I spoke to the president of Steelworkers in Indianapolis, where Carrier United Technologies brought all hands into a meeting like this, except it was 2,000 people, and told them, even though they've done a great job and the plant's productive, just like Nabisco, gravity is taking their jobs to Mexico. And they were met, the plant manager was met with hissing and booing. But the hissing and booing, or the pain of those workers in Nabisco yesterday, isn't stopping what we face. We need the political revolution to stop what we face. We need trade deals that are based on us to stop what we face. And all too often we do it plant by plant, whether it's American Axle or whether it's Nabisco or whether it's Carrier in Indianapolis. We try plant by plant. We wait till it comes for us. And when it comes for us, the greed of management and the lack of a trade policy in our country, we don't have a trade policy. We have foreign policy. When I met with the president, he called me to the Oval Office on the TPP, along with one other union leader. And he said to me, Larry, this is how we move Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, and Singapore towards us and away from China. And I said, what about our jobs? Well, we'll get jobs from it too. The jobs are always an afterthought. These families are always an afterthought. The cities of Flint, etc., are always an afterthought. So I couldn't be prouder than to be here today. Let me first introduce Kevin Mack from IBW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 58. He's an executive board member and a 9-year member of the IBW, located in Detroit. Kevin?
Good morning. My name's Kevin Mack, born and raised in the city of Detroit. I'm a proud member of the IBEW. I support Bernie Sanders because he's the only candidate talking about the unfair trade deals that are harming working families and killing off small manufacturing jobs. He's also a man of honesty and integrity, and has been proven with his track record of over 20 years. He's been consistent on social economic issues, and I'm ready for a political revolution.
Kevin, thanks for being with us and for your support. Next, I'm going to introduce Kim Ward. Kim Ward's story, the pain in this story, the bravery in her life, is repeated day after day. And again, for many of us, it's almost too much to bear, these stories. That these stories need to be an inspiration to us of the change that is possible. Kim worked at American Axle, was a member of the UAW, and she will now share the story of what she and her husband faced. Kim, thank you so much for being with us.
Good morning. My name is Kim Ward. I worked for American Axle for almost 14 years. I loved my job. I enjoyed going there. That was my peace of mind. I was able to provide for my family and put a roof over their heads. I started with them in 1995. I met my husband there. He started in 1994. My father-in-law also worked there, so it was like a family thing. We had a good thing going. We raised our kids together. In 2006, we went into negotiations for a new contract. However, that didn't go too well, and we went out on strike. The company wanted to cut our pay by half. They cut our health benefits, cut our tuition reimbursement. It was a huge shock to our family to lose that much income, our benefits. It was hard to make ends meet. We went out on strike. It was a blizzard that year. We stood in all of the elements. We were out from February to May, and it didn't do us any good. The union accepted the reduced terms. After giving up all these concessions, the company decided Mexico was where they moved the jobs to. So I decided to take the buyout. My husband stayed a little longer, but eventually he left also. So my husband and I, they had the little TAA plan, and we did that. We went to school, still couldn't find jobs. My husband decided to get with some buddies, and it was around Christmas time in December of 2011. And one day he went missing for 3 days. I got out in my car and I went looking for him, and as I like to say, it was the Holy Spirit that led me to where his car was parked. I found him in a building, and the roof had collapsed on him and his friend, and they were deceased. They were in the building, and 2 tons of rubble had fallen on them. So, excuse me. I just feel that if we hadn't lost our jobs, he would still be alive today. I'm almost certain of that. I thought we were set. Now my husband has passed away. My body's a mess. I have bulging discs all down my back. I'm suffering from sciatica. I can barely walk. I have PTSD due to the tragic loss of my husband. But the one thing I want you to hear is that a lot of lives were destroyed by what happened, and it's not fair. My 6 children would never be the same because their dad is gone. And as a mom, that hurts me. A mother is supposed to be able to fix everything, and I cannot fix that. I cannot bring my husband back. I can't fix their lives. The youngest of my children is 15, and he's hurting really bad. But I stand with Senator Sanders because he's fighting. He's fighting for all of us working people. He's fighting for a policy that works for people, and he stands for the workers. He treats them so that corporate greed doesn't take over. It's all about corporate greed, and it has to stop.
Kim, thanks for sharing that painful story. And again, your story will help inspire us not only to support this campaign, but to keep this fight going for a decent trade policy in this country. It's now my pleasure to introduce Senator Bernie Sanders. It's not his words that inspire us, although they do. It's the way he's walked. It's who he stood with for his entire life. And that's why all of us standing here volunteer in this campaign, and that's why we're proud to call him our leader.
Thank Larry, who for a very long time was leader of the Communication Workers of America and one of the great progressive trade union leaders in our country. And I want to thank Kevin for his support, and I want to thank Kim for being here, because the story that Kim has told about what these disastrous trade agreements have done to millions of people in this country is something media doesn't talk about enough, and we don't talk about it enough. So Kim, thank you very much for your courage, for your taking your pain and using that pain to try to fight for a better America and for the rights of working people. A campaign, as you all know, is not just about what you said yesterday or your latest position on the issue. It is about what you have stood for your entire career, what you have voted for, what you have supported. And one of the most important issues that have faced millions of working people in this country over the last many decades, Secretary Hillary Clinton and I have very, very different points of view. From the first days that I was in Congress, and I was elected to Congress in 1990, from the very first days, I understood that NAFTA and other trade policies were being written by corporate America for one reason. And that is that corporate America made the decision that they didn't want to pay workers in this country a living wage, provide health benefits, protect environmental standards, negotiate with trade unions. They didn't want to do that. What they wanted to do was shut down plants in America, go to Mexico, go to China, go to desperately poor countries, hire people for pennies an hour, and then bring their products back into America. You didn't need to have a PhD in economics to figure that one out. From the first days that I was in Congress, not only did I oppose NAFTA and virtually every other trade agreement, but I was on the picket lines in opposition to those agreements. I had a sense that what Kim was talking about is exactly what would happen. And what did happen? What happened is that over the years, millions of people lost decent paying jobs. Now, on the issue of trade, Secretary Clinton's views and mine are very different. She has supported NAFTA. I oppose NAFTA. She supported permanent normal trade relations with China. I vigorously oppose PNTR with China. She supported permanent normal trade relations with Vietnam. I oppose that. She supported the Colombia Free Trade Agreement. I oppose that. And she supported the Korean Free Trade Agreement. I oppose that. Now, a number of months ago, after receiving a lot of pressure from the trade union movement, she kind of changed her view on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. She came out against it. But interestingly enough, as you may know, Tom Donahue, the head of the National Chamber of Commerce, said a few weeks ago that he thought actually if she became president, she would probably change her views on that. So this is an issue of huge consequence. It's an issue that we don't talk about enough. I did not know, this is quite incredible, until literally a few days ago, that in 1960, 56 years ago, the wealthiest city in the United States of America was Detroit, Michigan. Anyone know that? Detroit, Michigan, the wealthiest city in America, with the largest private sector employer, a company called General Motors. Today, Detroit is the poorest big city in the United States with a poverty rate of almost 40%. From 1998 to 2011, half of Detroit's auto workforce lost their jobs. But it is not just Detroit. Over the past 15 years, the state of Michigan has lost 1/3 of its manufacturing jobs. The most significant reason for this economic decline is our failed trade policies. 43,000 people in Michigan have lost their jobs as a result of NAFTA. In Ohio, 35,000 people lost their jobs as well, and in Illinois, another 35,000. 700 auto workers in Wayne, Michigan are being thrown out on the street because Ford is now building a $2.5 billion plant, not in Michigan, not in Vermont, not in Illinois, but in Mexico. 300 UAW jobs in Grand Rapids are being shipped to Monterrey, Mexico, where Dematic will be paying them $1.50 an hour. And that is what this whole trade business is about. American workers are being forced to compete against people who make $1.50 an hour, or maybe in Vietnam, where the minimum wage is 56 cents an hour. But it is not just even Detroit. If you look at Flint, Michigan has seen 11 factories shut down over the years. And when we look at Flint, it is not only a poisoned water system, it is the understanding that trade policies have devastated that community as well. Since 2001, in this country, we have lost almost 60,000 factories, millions of good-paying jobs. Almost all of that is attributable to disastrous trade policies. Kim made another point that needs to also be mentioned, not discussed often. What she talked about is the company, during negotiations, wanted to significantly cut wages. Where's Kim? Is that right? Significantly. They made you an offer that said, what, cut by 50%? All right. Now, how does that happen, and what is that about? That's called the race to the bottom. And what companies are saying to workers all over this country, if you do not take major reductions in your wages and your benefits, if you want your job to stay in the United States, you're going to have to take those cuts, or else we're going to move to China. And that is one of the reasons why in manufacturing and many other areas, wages and benefits have gone down. So as Larry Cohn said, it is time for a change in trade policies. It is time to tell corporate America in a very forceful way that they are no longer going to throw American workers out on the street and build shiny new plants in China, Mexico, or other low-wage countries. That, in fact, they're going to start reinvesting in this country. In my view, a nation cannot have a strong and prosperous economy if we continue to import all of the goods that we need. We've got to start rebuilding our manufacturing base right here in America and end the deindustrialization of this country. So I want to thank all of those who have been with here today and thank them for keeping up the fight to create a trade policy that works for workers in this country, not just CEOs of powerful corporations. Thank you. Any questions on trade? Yes. Well, this is a criticism of Secretary Clinton's trade policies, which have been a disaster. And these are policies which are resulting in the disappearance of the American middle class and the fact that we have 47 million people living in poverty. These trade policies, by the way, I would tell you, have been supported not just by Republicans, but by too many Democrats. As to why some trade unions are supporting Secretary Clinton, you're going to have to ask them. But I'm very proud that we have have the support of the National Nurses Union. I'm proud that we have the support of the CWA. I'm proud that we have the support of the postal workers of America. And we have locals all over this country. Larry has helped me put together a grassroots movement of trade unionists at the grassroots level. How many? Many thousands.
100,000 or more.
We have 100,000. Sometimes the leadership does not necessarily speak for the members. Yes.
Secretary Clinton has talked about trade a lot on this campaign. She says she voted for some trade agreements and voted against some trade agreements. Devil's advocate for a moment, isn't that what you want your senators to do, to take these issues case by case?
Sure.
Should a senator have a blanket policy of opposing all?
Well, you're right. There should not be a blanket policy. There should be a case-by-case example. I've looked at the cases. I looked at NAFTA. I looked at permanent normal trade relations. And what I concluded is that those trade agreements would be a disaster for American workers. Now, if your point is that the trade agreement came forward that was based on fair trade policies, that was good for American workers, that was good for poor people around the world, of course I would support it. So it's not that nobody is hearing anybody up here saying, oh, trade is terrible, we have to end all trade, build a wall around America. That is not the point. These trade agreements were pushed and written to a significant degree by corporate America, for corporate America, and the results are clear. We're not talking about some academic debate here. The results are clear. When you look at Detroit, you look at Flint, you look at my own state of Vermont, we have lost thousands and thousands of decent paid jobs. Our trade policies have failed. NAFTA has failed. CAFTA has failed. Permanent normal trade relations with China cost us millions of decent paying jobs. American workers, it's part of the TPP, should not be forced to compete against people in Vietnam. You know what the minimum wage is in Vietnam? 65 cents an hour. What do you think American corporations are going to do? You think they're going to pay somebody here $20, $25 an hour when you can go to Vietnam and pay somebody 70 cents an hour? I don't think so. So to answer your question, the real question is, was she right to vote for or support NAFTA? Was she right to support permanent normal trade relations with China? The answer is she was very, very wrong, and millions of families around this country have been suffering as a result of those disastrous trade agreements. Questions on trade? Trade. Yes, sir. You are with whom? Sure. We surely look. I hope I have, on a broader issue, to answer Peter's question as well. I've been in Congress. I was in the House for 16 years, in the Senate for 9 years, 25 years. Last that I heard, I had a 98% pro-union voting record. That is the strongest pro-union voting record during that period. I'm proud of that. I don't take money from Wall Street. I don't take money from corporate America. I never have, never wanted that. These are my people. This is my family right here. People I've always represented. Unions, we've gotten the support of some of the great unions in America. They're here. Secretary Clinton has gotten support of other unions, and unions will make their own decisions. But I think if you look at my record on issues of importance to the trade union movement, look at Secretary Clinton's record over the years, I think it's very clear that my views are the views that reflect the needs of millions of American workers. Yes, sir. You're with whom?
With ABC News. You quoted Tom Donahue saying that if Secretary Clinton was elected, that she would change.
He had confidence that she would.
Yeah. Do you think that she would change her position on TPP?
Well, all I can say is that she voiced a lot of support over the years for the concept of the TPP. And she was very reluctant to come out in opposition. Finally, I think, as the entire trade union movement, to the best of my knowledge, there is not one union in this country that did not vigorously oppose the TPP. She's running for president. She concluded that it was a good idea to oppose the TPP, and she did. She has supported many disastrous trade agreements. All I did was refer you to a statement made by the head of the Chamber of Commerce, which is vigorously for the TPP. And he said, really, don't worry too much about what she says. She has to say this. She's running against Bernie Sanders. But when it really matters, she'll come around. Now, you'll have to ask her view on that. Okay. You're with whom? Okay, I'll get to you in 1 second. I will, because we love student activists and writers. Yes, way in the back there, sir.
Thank you, NBC. One of the things we've seen in exit polls is that a majority of Democrats want to continue President Obama's policies. He was very much in favor of this TPP. Are you casting too much of a difference from President Obama?
I think, you're looking at this in too much of a political way. All that I am here to say today, along with everybody else here, is our trade policies for the last many decades have been an unmitigated disaster. They were a disaster under Republican leadership. They were a disaster under Democratic leadership. And I would say that many, many Americans are disappointed and disagree with President Obama for his support for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. In terms of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, I do not want to see American workers competing against people in Vietnam where there is a minimum wage of 65 cents an hour. I do not want to see American workers having to compete with migrant workers in Malaysia who are working as modern-day slaves, immigrants who come into that country, their passports are taken away, and they're literally unable to return to their native lands and are working in semi-slave-like conditions. And I go on and on about the TPP and the other negative aspects to it, but I think it is a continuation of a disastrous set of trade policies which have helped destroy the middle class of this country. There was once a time in America where if you had a good manufacturing job, and especially if you had a union behind you, you could make good middle class wages and you had good benefits. That was once the case. But today, those jobs are long gone, and many of the new jobs in manufacturing are paying substantially less than those jobs paid years ago. So if the question is, do I disagree with President Obama on TPP? I surely do.
Did he abandon the workers who you're standing with?
You're putting words, you're trying to play a gotcha type of game here. All I said is I strongly disagree with President Obama on the TPP. I happen to think that in many other areas he has been a very good president. All of you remember where we were 7.5 years ago when Bush left office. We were losing 800,000 jobs a month, and the automobile industry was on the verge of collapse, and we had a world financial crisis, which we had a major world financial crisis. We're in better shape today than we were then. On TPP, I strongly disagree with President Obama. Yes, you had a question or idea? Yeah.
Policy-wise, how would you plan to keep jobs in America and out of other countries to prevent job loss? And do you have another agreement that would?
Well, the essence of a trade agreement is that it works for both sides. And nobody is up here in disagreeing that that trade is a positive thing. It could be a positive thing. You and I could work on a trade agreement. But it is not a good thing when millions of people in this country lose their jobs. So what you have got to do is negotiate essentially agreements that work for American workers, and by the way, help poor people around the world. The trade agreements that we have seen right now clearly have been a disaster, and we can't go down that route any longer. All right, last question. Do I have one? Yeah, ma'am, back there.
Could you just give us an example of a trade policy that you think has worked in the past?
Larry, got a trade policy that has worked in the past?
Africa Growth and Opportunity Act that was President Obama. I think it's good to promote trade between Africa and the United States.
Okay. Let me conclude with this story. And it's a funny thing because it's the other side of the coin from what Kim was talking about. Kim talks about what happened to workers here in Michigan. In the early 1990s, I went with Representative John Conyers, by the way, when I was in the House, who represents Detroit. We went to the Maquiladora region of Mexico. That's a special zone in Mexico where they give tax breaks to companies who settle in that area. And we went there because we wanted to see the impact of NAFTA on Mexican workers, not American workers, on Mexican workers. Never forget this. And when you go to that region, and what you see is a whole lot of, this is early 1990s, a whole lot of modern, state-of-the-art factories, beautiful, beautiful factories, many of them from corporations, American corporations. And then we said, well, we want to go visit the homes of the workers, the people who work in those factories. The only problem was that we couldn't visit the homes of those Mexican workers because they didn't live in homes. They literally lived in cardboard shacks. The cardboard you get, when you have a washing machine that the cardboard is wrapped in, or a dishwasher, that was their homes. They were making 25 cents an hour drinking filthy water. And they had one light bulb stretched out from a distance. All right. That was the workers in Mexico working in these shiny new factories that previously had been in the United States of America. So, on behalf of the workers in Mexico, where extreme poverty has increased over the years, and certainly on behalf of the workers in this country where millions of decent paying jobs have been lost, where other workers now are working for significantly lower wages than they previously had, no question to my mind that we have got to fundamentally change our trade policy, rebuild our manufacturing sector in this country, and create millions of jobs here that pay workers a living wage. Thank you all very much.